What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. Now, I've talked a little bit about this throughout my various interviews that I've done here on the podcast, but I've got, all through college, I spent my time working in restaurants. And for a long time, I thought I was going to go to culinary school to become a chef. Then I got a job in a restaurant and I realized how miserable that actually was. And I decided it's not for me. I ended up getting UX design. But I've been watching The Bear recently. I don't know if anyone out there has seen The Bear. Fantastic show. I think it's on Hulu or something like that. I don't know exactly, but it's about this guy. He opens a restaurant. It's all about the show. Very realistic. It gave me flashbacks of how realistic it was. And I thought, there's so many parallels here to UX design and software in general. So I went out and I found my good friend, Anne Cantera, who is a UX designer, but she has a past life. She was a culinary, a chef. Were you technically a chef? I don't know. I know that term. Sometimes people, she was an executive chef. She went to Culinary Institute of America. And I said, she would be the perfect person to talk about when we talk about the parallels between UX design. So Anne, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Oh, it's going good. Super, super grateful for the opportunity and to chat with you about. I feel like we talk about this subject every time we meet, so we might as well make it official.
Make it official. I love it. Yeah. And when I saw The Bear, the first thing I thought about was just like the grueling nature of the kitchen industry, of working in a kitchen. But what a lot of people don't realize, I think, especially people coming into UX design, is UX design can be very grueling, not in the physical aspect that working in a hot kitchen with, sharp knives, fire, getting burned and all that stuff, but it's very grueling mentally, which, not to say working in, but UX design can be a very grueling thing, especially if you end up in a place with relatively low maturity across the board. So I want to talk a little bit. So before we do that, let's give everybody establish your street cred out there, Anne. Let's tell us a little bit about you and how you got into from culinary, from working in restaurants, ultimately into UX design. I think that's even a fascinating story. So let's kick it off there. Tell us about you.
Well, it's not a sweet story, at least not to start out with. I got my first restaurant gig when I was about 16, and I liked it because I didn't have to get up till noon. My shift started at 2.
Oh, wow.
And I would work till about 1 a.m. And I liked that rock and roll lifestyle. I was all about it at the time. At 17, I left for the Culinary Institute, and I was the youngest kid on campus, and there was 20 males for every female.
Oh, man. Wow. And you were 17. That's young.
I was already tough by then because I had been bullied in elementary school. So I was already pretty tough by 17. So it really didn't faze me. I graduated with a 3. I really kicked butt while I was there. I apprenticed with Wolfgang Puck.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome. I came home and just started to work. And it is grueling. It is bad pay. It is no benefits. It is more hours in 2 days that maybe 3 days that most people work in a week. There are no weekends off. There's no holidays off. There's no nights off. It's rough. I love The Bear because it's the only, and I say only because I've seen them all, it's the only media that has really, really depicted the true nature of how brutal it is. Yeah. That said, I did it for years. I did it with every child. I had 3 kids. At one point, I had a 6-month-old, a 6-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And ended up getting nominated for Best Chef on Long Island while raising 3 little kids.
Wow.
I don't recommend that. I was living on 3 hours of sleep a night, and it wasn't sustainable, but I did it, and it's a feather in my cap. Then I opened my own meal delivery service because I said, I have to be able to do this from home. I have to be able to take care of my kids, and do culinary from home. So my husband had his construction business. I had my meal delivery business. And then I just couldn't do savory anymore. I just was over it. And I just wanted to do something more artistic because I grew up designing and painting and doing mosaics and just being an artist in general. And I started doing really high level custom cakes. Yeah. And so I started a cake business out of my home. And I did that for years and years and years while I raised my kids. And I
And you
really
did
think
that
that's,
was that full time? Did you do that full time?
well, it's funny how that works because a cake has to be fresh and everybody either wants it on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday.
Oh, right.
So Thursday and Friday, you're working like literally 20 hours a day. And then you go into the deliveries on the weekend. So it's pretty hairy, but what a great way to flex your artistic abilities, your design abilities. It's all related. It's all so similar. Only making cakes, you make about 29 cents an hour on some of them. So
Yeah.
it's not as lucrative as tech work is, for sure.
Right.
So what happened after that was I was getting too big for my little home business, and it was like time to pivot. Like, do you get a storefront, which I knew better because I'd been in the business forever, and I knew I did not want that responsibility, or do you
That's
turn
a lot, yeah.
and pivot back into tech? I worked in tech for a while in between restaurant work. I did a
Okay.
couple years, went back in the Flash days, back in the
Yep.
pen tool days. You know, if you didn't know the
Oh,
pen
yeah.
tool, you couldn't work with Adobe back then
Oh,
in
yeah.
the late 90s, early 90s, mid 90s, whatever. So I did work in tech for about 3 years back then. And then I always would joke that the food business was like the mafia. It's like, just when I think I'm out, it pulled me back in. Because I
Yep.
couldn't, because I was new in tech, but had been around the restaurant business, and I couldn't turn away that executive chef salary with kids
Yeah.
for the entry level salary of tech. So I went back to doing that. And then, long story short, 5 years ago or so, I pivoted back into tech. Um, and I haven't looked back because even the roughest parts of tech are still easier than
Yeah.
the mediocre parts of the restaurant business, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah. I heard you. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned bringing back. Like a little backstory about me. I think a lot, maybe you might not know this. Well, I think you know this. Other people listening might not, but I was actually all through high school, I thought I wanted to be a chef. So when I went to college, I actually was going to go to a school down in Thibodaux, Louisiana, Nichols State University. At the time, at least, this was '99. It was the only public school with a culinary program. And I was gonna do that, and I was gonna go, and none of my other friends wanted to go to Thibodaux to Nichols. So I was like, well, I got to go where my friends are going to go. So it's just a stupid thing, thinking back now, like who knows? Although I did meet my wife at LSU and stuff. And so my life would be totally different if I did do that probably. But anyway, I ended up going to LSU, and I still wanted to be a chef though. So I was like, well, I'm going to get a job at a restaurant while I, go to school. So that was what I did. And I worked in kitchens and stuff. And I worked at a restaurant with a guy who graduated from the CIA, from Culinary Institute of America. And he was going to sponsor me and another guy to go there. So we probably, chances are good I would have gotten in had I, found the money to pay for it and stuff. But after working in the kitchen, I was like, I'm not making, I think I was making like $7, $8 an hour, and I had friends who were waiting tables and they're making $20 an hour, hundreds of dollars a shift, and I'm like, what am I doing in the back of the house? Like, why am I not waiting tables? So I ended up moving to the front of the house and waiting tables and bartending. So I did that like all through college. I made a decent amount of money. And when I actually graduated, quote unquote, with my first quote unquote real job, I think I was making like $24,000 a year. And I was like, I made like almost half of what I made bartending. And so I would actually go and bartend on the weekends because I was just to make extra money. And it was like, it kept pulling me back. But it's funny you mentioned that it brings you back in, because I feel like you get addicted to that adrenaline rush, like that it's stressful, but at the same time, it's like an adrenaline rush. It's like, I don't want to compare this to like combat or anything, but like when people in the military get out of the military, they miss it, right? Because there was that like adrenaline, and it's just so mundane sitting in a desk, and all the commotion and this and everybody yelling, and I don't know. Anyway, it's sort of addicting. When I saw the bear, it made me like miss it a little bit, because it had been arguably a decade or more since I had been working in a restaurant. I posted about it on LinkedIn, and you're like, hell no. I think I said something like, oh, I miss it. Anybody miss going back in the restaurant? You're like, absolutely not. But you did it a lot longer than I did. I think you way more deeper into
I
it
feel
than
like
I
it's a
was, for
public
sure.
service announcement to tell people not to let their kids go to culinary school.
I know. Yeah, it's a crazy lifestyle for sure. But one of the things, like I said, you got that got me thinking about this was this idea of how similar, crafting a customer experience or user experience, even more broadly, I think a better way to think about it is really customer experience. How similar that is to a restaurant, and when you think about it in terms of customer experience versus UX design, which is what we often think of as interface design, right? We're designing for a screen. But when you think more broadly about customer experience, I mean, that is exactly what restaurants are doing. They're creating a guest experience, and everything has to work in tandem, and everyone has to work together in order for those guests to have a great experience. You can't have people fighting in the back and, front of house, back of house, not cooperating and fighting with each other. It's all got to be this seamless sort of flow, which I loved about the bear. You mentioned it was really super realistic, that, how they talk about, how the front of house and back of house work together in the pre-shift meetings, which I've never seen really before on TV. That pre-shift meeting was such a
Good family meal.
yeah, exactly. Everybody. I never worked at a restaurant that did the family meal, but I do have a lot of friends that worked in restaurants, and I know about the family meal. But yeah, that's something like you never really see. But anyway, I wanted you to talk a little bit about that from your experience. Compare and contrast, software with restaurants, if you could.
All right. Well, I had been living this for a really long time, like knowing that there was a lot of overlap and knowing that there were a lot of similarities. But until you asked me to do the podcast, I never kind of put it to paper. And then when I did, I realized that it's so in depth. Like there's so many ways that they are similar and the process. And so I wrote it down because
Ooh, nice.
it was so cathartic to finally do, because it was always some sort of floating around in my head but never organized.
Yeah.
But like from whether you're planning a menu or one recipe or one menu item, you always start with planning and preparation, right?
Yep.
That's step one. And chefs and UX designers always both start things with planning and preparation. Whereas I, as a chef, would prepare my ingredients and my tools, the UX designers will gather their research and their insights and discovery. And then so that was always number one, like, on both sides. That's, you have to get ready, you have to plan, you have to prepare. And then number two, it's not really, so the user-centered approach, right, that gets tossed around a lot. You have to kind of prioritize what the end user or the person eating in your restaurant, their experience is going to be like. So like, the chef designs for the customer's palate, the UX designer designs for the user experience.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, right? And it's iterative. Both processes are so iterative. When I would create a recipe, I would have like the base model or the beta and then just kind of tweak it until it was perfection. And I feel like that's like one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for? One of the most important, I guess, between the two, that creating that moment of continuous improvement. I think that's the words I'm looking for.
Yeah.
You get the feedback and also known as Kaizen. I don't know if you know that terminology.
We use lean at GE, so I know all about all that stuff.
So, and there's attention to detail. Yes, that's kind of a given.
So let me ask you something real quick, Anne. That idea, Kaizen, is that Is that is that something people think about in the restaurant industry? Is that a concept that you've just picked up other places, or is that actually something that you've learned through chefs and talking about Kaizen and that idea of continuous improvement?
I read it at some point a few years ago when I was working at one of the best cake shops, and it was just me and three women, and we were creating some of the best cakes around. And the process of cakes take a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, say week one, we had to do a Spider-Man cake, right? And we pipe the spider web, and it looks cool. And then a month later, we have to do another one, and we're like, you know what? That spider web was cool, but look at this new method
Yeah. Okay.
with cake lace, right?
Oh, nice.
And it's perfect. It looks like it was cut by a laser. And that's just one little component on one little cake when we're doing about 30 per week. So we were trying to master every movement to make everything as stunningly beautiful but amazingly efficient at the same time. So we would do stuff like that and look at each other and be like, Kaizen, baby, and then the next time we knew, like, we had reached the pinnacle, it couldn't get any better for that spider web. So then we had that, like that, that got put in the books. That's how we did that. That was the best that could be. But there were 100 other techniques that we would be doing on other things to get to that pinnacle of perfection, of efficiency and beauty at the same time. Yeah. So it's I don't think it was spoken in the restaurants, but
right.
in
that idea is a universal kind of thing especially when you're building things and you can reproduce things over time. And that's, again, that just so people are aware, you may know this, but just for the listeners, that idea Kaizen comes from lean, which is, a Toyota manufacturing concept that Toyota invented. I can't remember exactly when, but anyway, that idea, Kaizen, continuous improvement, always making, improving your process, improving your product, anything, just constantly taking a step back and looking at what you've built and or what you've done, how you've done it, and can you improve it next time. And there's all kinds of methods and stuff. Yeah, but we're a manufacturing company, so we try to approach manufacturing with that Kaizen. It's sort of permeated everything, even the software team. So it's kind of cool. We do a lot of those lean events and use some of the fancy lean language.
And it even predates that. It's from like the Japanese culture from
right.
Yeah. Long. So the whole concept is beautiful to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whether they have like a word for it, which is just kind of cool.
And I'm grateful that we got to snag that word and use it, because there are certain processes that really, really make sense for. Yeah. So, back to the crossover of it all.
And sorry, real quick. So I was thinking, I'm going to cut this out, by the way, but
fine.
If you want to go through like the list, and then we can go back. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And then we'll go back and we'll dive into each one. Yeah. Got it. Okay. Got it. So I'm sorry. Okay.
It's okay.
We'll splice this out. Go ahead.
No worries. So the next part of the process that I feel like too is it's part of iteration is prototyping. Mm-hmm. A recipe is a form of a prototype, and then you tweak it until it's the perfect recipe. And
I never thought of that before. I like that idea.
Yeah, wireframes become prototypes. Recipes become meals.
That's really smart. I love that.
And then the collaboration piece in restaurants. This is really hairy. I know people think this is hairy in UX, but in restaurants, it's a little bit different. I mean, the front of the house, back of the house, management. We're a pretty wild bunch, and generally, I don't want to say anything that is offensive to anybody, but generally, restaurant people are a pretty wild bunch. If you watch The Bear, I mean, that was one of the things that really created the reality of that, was all those personalities.
Yeah.
So the collaboration, I feel like in the restaurant business is very, very hard to keep smooth, but there's a whole chain of command. Chefs work with sous chefs and kitchen staffs, and UX designers collaborate with developers and researchers and stakeholders. So like, it's those relationships between people, mm-hmm. You may be in the dining room having this outstanding experience, but there's bloodshed in the kitchen. Like, mm-hmm. there's a whole reality to that level of collaboration, and as far as relationships between people, personalities, and egos, and just making it work. It's a lot.
Right. Yep.
And feedback integration, I think, is another huge one. I mean, I don't
Ooh.
even think it needs to be discussed. I think it's pretty obvious what feedback integration means. Your recipe
Right.
stinks, you make it better.
Yeah.
When they send it back and say it's too sweet, it's too this, it's too that, you adjust.
Yeah.
And the real, like, kind of beautiful crossover is you're never going to be everything to everybody, but you have to be that happy medium for as many as possible.
Right. Right. Yeah. You can't try to impress everybody. You can't try to appease everyone. But
A
you
vegan comes
certainly
into
have
a
to be
steak restaurant. I
most people.
mean,
Yeah.
if you could make that vegan happy, you did a great job.
Right. Right.
So it's the same thing with a digital or a technological tool. You want it to work for as many people as possible, but it will never be a.
Got it. I love it. Is that the whole list?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So let's dig into this list a little bit more. I've got
Okay.
so many thoughts about this as well. I love this list. So just to sort of recap, you got to start with the planning, user-centered, guest-centered, that idea of prototyping, the idea of trying things out, practicing collaboration with the team, working with all these individuals, the different team members, things like that, and then finally getting the feedback and improving, and that idea Kaizen.
Yeah.
So I'm
You
going to
want me to
start with.
read? I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Do you want me to just read you like one is planning and preparation,
Mhm.
two is user-centered approach,
Okay.
three is iterative process, four
Okay.
is attention to detail, five is workflow efficiency, six is prototyping, seven is collaboration, eight is empathy, nine is adaptability, and 10 is feedback and integration.
Oh, all right, cool. Oh, there's like more to that list, yeah, more detail. So let's dig into some of these a little bit. I want to start with that idea of start with planning. And this was something that I actually had thought about creating a solo episode for this months and months and months ago, and I just never did. Because I actually thought, I was like, I never really worked in like a restaurant kitchen, really, but like this idea of mise en place, you had a better way to pronounce it. How do
Mise
you
en
pronounce
place.
mise en place, which
Yeah.
is French, so it's all you gotta say it in a fancier accent than I did. But that idea of getting everything in its place, everything has a place, and really setting yourself up so that you can be as effective as possible, as efficient as possible. That's really, restaurant industry. You gotta be fast. So talk a little bit about that idea of mise en place, sorry. And and how that kind of applies here as well, as I feel like that kind of ties into this idea of planning, if I'm not
I feel
mistaken.
like the ultimate example of mise en place is a design system.
Yeah.
It's like all your ingredients, your vegetables are chopped, your meat is clean, your fish is filleted, and everything is just all set up and ready to just be grabbed and used as it needs. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one most designers can kind of wrap their heads around. That's the equivalent. Like, the design system is the equivalent to the whole restaurant ready to do service at 5 o'clock on a Saturday night, right? Like, or like, a group of icons, maybe just one group of ingredients ready for one dish,
Yeah.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I love that idea. The other thing too, I think about when I think about this, the idea of start with planning. For me, I do a lot of strategy work now. I do a lot less of the actual interface design. And for me, having a template ready to go for project kickoff, having a set of questions that I know I need to ask, what are we doing this for? What are the ultimate problems? What are the outcomes? Who's in charge? What are the stakeholders? Blah, blah, blah. Having my RACI chart ready, having these I use Miro boards. Some people might use Fig Jams, but having these boards ready to go for a project kickoff, having various templates for things like a repeatable process for a service bulletin, for a service blueprint, having that template ready and the files ready, so I'm not recreating it each time, helps me to be more efficient. So, I feel like it's like one of those things, like across the board, again, for software. If you're an engineer, this would have been a great panel discussion to have, like someone from product engineering on too. But someone from engineering, you're going to have your file structure, everything's ready to go. Your product manager is going to have their charts and whatever whatever product managers do, they're going to have their stuff ready. And this idea of just getting everything ready to go, to me, it just applies across the board, and that's where I go back to with like restaurant versus, software. It's not just UX. It's like the software is the similar piece. Like UX is one part of that, but there's a sales piece, there's a brand promise, there's a brand in general, which would be the restaurant, right? There's a menu, which would be sort of like the sales site, right? Like all that stuff, the advertisements, obviously, how you get people in the door, how you get people coming back, there's so much stuff there that's like, I think even bigger than UX, which is why I like to think about it as like CX. But anyway, I don't know. Maybe we'll do this again. We'll have a big panel discussion.
Be fun. Decide who's front of the house, who's back of the house.
Yeah. Any former chefs or restaurant people turned product managers or software engineers? Find them. That'd be great.
Okay.
All right. So I love it. What else? Any other thoughts about this idea of planning? You got any deep thoughts about that?
I think that's one of the easier ones to kind of wrap your heads around. Everybody has their process, right? On both sides, on the food side or on the tech side. The process is a little bit different, right? And it's a little bit different in every restaurant, right? Versus, you plan an app a little bit different than you would plan a website, or you would plan a breakfast restaurant a little bit different than a fine dining restaurant. But everybody has their planning. You have to do it. It's unavoidable.
You know what? You just made me think of something. Is like part of the problem I feel like with software in general is you have these teams that become like feature factories, and they end up being feature factories because they aren't really thinking about a North Star or vision. And you just made a great point. If I'm a breakfast restaurant, right, I'm going to avoid certain dishes. I'm not going to go try to create, like, I'm not going to have a caviar menu. I'm not going to have a champagne list, right? I'm going to focus on breakfast related things, and I might experiment and play around with breakfast stuff. But I'm going to have a very different menu from like a French restaurant down the street, and often like in software, a lot of these teams, I think they'll just say, well, some other team is building this crap. Let's go build something similar to try to compete with them. But you've got to know what the outcome is for your software and who your people are, who your audience is, who your users are, and what the target is, and focus there to solve a problem. Like I'm going to a breakfast place because I want some goddamn, scrambled eggs. I want the best scrambled eggs and omelet like I can get, and you can play around with that genre. It could be a diner, could be like a really fancy French inspired breakfast place with really fancy omelets, but that's your, you know what I mean? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Don't bring me swordfish at 8 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So being a feature factory is similar.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get that for 100%.
All right. What was the next one on your list? What you got?
All right. So the next one on my list is user-centered approach, which is interesting because if you have a taco truck and you have your user-centered approach is going to be very different from each other.
Right.
And I think that happens in tech as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So dig into that one a little bit from your perspective as someone from a restaurant. How do restaurants generally think about that idea of user-centered approach? Is that something restaurants usually start with, like, who is our customer, or do they have a concept and they sort of go from there and then try to find their ideal customer after they've already established a
It depends
concept?
on the founder. I've worked for people who have never worked in a restaurant before. One time I worked for 2 lawyers. They didn't have a plan. Right. They just flew by the seat of their pants and prayed for the best.
And how did that work out for them?
They did it right for a while.
Yeah.
The food was really good. They hired well.
That's the trick, right?
Yeah, and if you hire a really good executive chef and you pay them well and they run the show.
And stay out of it and let them do their job.
Do not, like, unsolicited feedback on minutia is a bad idea.
Now, so here's another, this is a really great parallel too. I know we're talking about users, and I don't know if you had on your list with stakeholders or something like that.
Yes.
But like, this is sort of like a great example of that, right? And maybe is that on your list? Because we could talk about that when we get there.
Yeah,
but
it is. But
yeah, okay. So we'll talk about, put a pin in that one. We'll talk about that when we get there. Because that's another thing, trying to influence people. It's like, they're experts, let them do their goddamn job, stay out of their way. But yeah, this idea of like, of that user-centered approach, it's kind of interesting because I've never run my own restaurant. I've been, worked in restaurants, but never actually ran the place. So I wasn't in charge of anything as an executive chef. I'm sure you have a lot more experience here. But that idea of crafting an experience around what your people want is a little different from software, because in theory, software is, I have a problem I'm trying to solve. Let me go find the people who need that problem solved and figure out exactly what they need, and I'll design it for them. Versus a restaurant where, does the world need another restaurant? Right. I mean, it's sort of a frivolous thing. So it depends on the restaurant,
It's
like a
more like
fine
a
dining.
game, right? Like you're
Yeah.
crafting
Yeah.
a game versus, a piece of software
Right.
that's going
Frivolous is the
to
wrong word.
solve your problem.
I guess you don't need to go to a restaurant to survive, I guess. Although, I don't know, maybe you don't need a software to survive either. But, anyway, I don't know. It's kind of, what are your thoughts there? I'm kind of curious. What's,
I think a lot of software solves like business problems,
mm-hmm,
and the restaurant is a business.
mm-hmm.
So I think that's one key difference there.
Yeah.
But you know what? It doesn't matter what business you're talking about. A happy customer is a happy customer, and an
Right.
angry customer is an angry customer.
Right.
And you don't want angry customers, so it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's all relative, really, in the
You know,
end.
you made me think of something just now. A restaurant down the street from us just recently closed, and they did an article in the local paper about what happened, because they were open for like 40 years. And one of the things that this guy had said was they became a destination, right? And the problem with that is you don't go to a destination for anything other than special occasions like anniversaries, birthdays, things like that. And it was hard for them to just fill the restaurant on a Friday or Saturday night, because they became known as the special place you go for special events, And so it's kind of interesting when I think about that. It's like tailoring to your audience in that case. Like, you almost dig yourself in a hole, because then you become a place that you don't think of to just go on a regular Friday night for dinner anymore.
Well, do you know
And
about what happened with Noma?
no.
Okay, Noma was like the best restaurant in the world for years,
Uh-huh.
and they closed their door last year, claiming it's just not sustainable to be what we are.
Because they were the fancy, like, yeah, they have a certain
Well, it's like,
aura about them,
dinner
or
is $1,000.
right.
Just in general, the pace, the stress,
Yeah.
once you have those Michelin stars, you're expected to keep that pace. If you lose a star, you might as well close your doors. And
Right.
it's just inhumane. And I think that was part of what they meant by not sustainable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That sounds fascinating. Yeah. I guess it's sort of similar, right? Like in that case, part of it, and this is something I don't think a lot of software teams think about, product, well, software companies. I don't know that they necessarily think of like the people that work there. Meta and Google and places, I've heard horror stories of people working there, how stressful it is. And I don't think anybody there really cares, because there's a million other people out there that want to work at Meta and Facebook and wherever, and they're willing to put up with the bullshit. But it's interesting for like a restaurant like that to think about, like, it's stressful for the owners, it's stressful for the employees, it's stressful for everybody involved. You can't keep that up. At a certain point, you have to say, let's just, like, I'm gonna go open up like a coffee shop down the street and forget all the other
Right.
stuff,
It's like quitting carbs. You could do it for a while.
Yeah, but you need
But
them at a
eventually
certain
you're
point. Your
like,
body eats itself. Yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah, so I love that idea, the idea user-centered. The other thing too that I think about is, just like customer focused is maybe an interesting way to put it. Is, you have a certain set of customers, maybe you're a neighborhood restaurant, maybe you're a downtown fine dining establishment, but you know who your clientele is and you know what they want. And it's similar to the point before about, don't bring me swordfish at 8 a.m. You have to know what people are coming there for, and you can't just go and build, offer crap that they're not going to want, to turn them off. And maybe, have them, aside from the offering, it's even just about, the service. And, that's the other thing I loved about the Bear, like the stuff that they would go through to, make sure these guests had a great experience. Like that, I don't, no spoilers for anybody out there, but that one episode, maybe that was Forks, or I can't remember, where cousin goes and he runs to get the pizza, and then they go in the back and they create this special meal for this customer. That's something they're going to remember. We talk about delight in UX design. That's delight, that's something that, yeah, that's something they will remember forever, and
the
it might be
chocolate-covered banana.
Yeah.
Because
what was that? What was that? Is that
that
in
was
there?
one of the last episodes. He had mentioned that his father had brought him a chocolate-covered banana as a child. in a passing
Yes, that's
conversation.
right. Yeah. And you remembered
And
it.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, they served it to him for dessert, and he got tears in his eyes because
Yeah.
it brought him back to that place. And I
Yes.
mean, listen, I work for Wolfgang Puck. I've dined at a couple of places that are really high up there. I've never seen anything like that. I think that might be a little
A
tiny
little
bit
exaggerated.
of fiction mixed in
Yeah.
there. There was a couple mistakes, couple little tiny
Yeah.
mistakes.
Yeah. But
Um,
yeah, it's funny. This is a totally off topic, I guess. But back when I was a kid, you've probably heard of Commander's Palace down in New Orleans. Very,
yes.
very fancy restaurant. My dad took my sister there for her 18th birthday, and she is picky as hell. She is so freaking picky. There was some special that night. It was like a chicken breast with all kinds of crab stuff with this and sauce and blah blah blah. So she was basically, can I have the chicken, but no that, no this, I don't want that other thing. But it's basically just like a grilled chicken breast,
Uh-huh.
at like this fancy fine dining restaurant. So they bring it out, chicken breast, and I think like fried potatoes or whatever it was. And then she asked for ketchup.
Yep.
And they were like, sure, we'll get some ketchup. Anyway, they went down the street to the store and bought a bottle of ketchup because they didn't have ketchup.
Oh,
Brought it to the table, and then this is the best part. They put it on the bill.
well, that's what I mean, I'm a little sensitive
So
to the subject because you just described my husband and my kids.
yeah,
And here
it's hard
I
to
am
take.
like, let's go to Flushing and get tea
Yeah,
smoked duck and curry
yeah,
goat. And they're like, we'll have a burger.
yeah. It was so funny.
So
But that idea, they went out of their way. But then, I don't know. Somebody was like, "Yeah, we'll show
delight.
you." Well,
Right.
yeah, but we'll stick it on the bill.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know that idea though of just being so focused on your users and understanding what they want and why they're there and how you can help them. And again, that idea of like outcome focused is something so many teams I feel like just miss, and it's just like, let's build this crap, let's build that crap, and they don't realize, again, the idea of feature factory, they're just building junk nobody wants. It's not there. I'm
Right.
not there for that.
You have to
So
deeply
anyway,
know the people and you have to deeply know their problem.
yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
All right, next one. What you got? What's the next
The next one is iterative process, which is my favorite one
one?
because I love recipe development.
Yeah,
It's one of my favorite things to do is like, because it's the epitome of Kaizen, right?
yeah,
Like I made it this way and it was good and everybody loved it, but to me it was like, it was all right.
yeah. I know it could be better. Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is interesting too, and this is something I think is also very similar to software. In the Bear, Sydney, right? Sorry, that was her name. Sydney and Carmi, they go and or I guess it was just Sydney. She goes out and she tests all these various menu items at all these various places. And she takes notes, and they did this well. And to me, this was, very similar, I think, to what we do in software, where we go, what are our competitors doing? How are they doing it? Can we do it better? Can we do it differently? What makes us unique? Why would someone want this over that? But one of the things that I think was really fascinating about this was when Sydney and Carmi are in their kitchen and they're cooking, and she thinks it's perfect. Carmi tastes, he's like, no, you can do better. It's like that idea of pushing ourselves, but there's also that idea of like perfection could kill it, right? If they could get to the point where they're just, it's not good enough, it's not good enough, it's not good enough. They have that deadline, they got 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is. And they just can't say at a certain point, like, you know what, we could do better. It's good enough for the opening night,
Yeah, but
and
her user testing was also faulty.
yeah, how so? Tell me about that.
Because she was testing it on everybody in the kitchen. When
Right.
she was testing it, she didn't take it to customers.
Right. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
didn't. She only when she took it to Carmi, he was the first really distinguished palette
Mm-hmm.
that she brought it to.
Yeah.
So her research was kind of skewed.
Yeah. Very biased. That's a good point. Yeah. So they were all, of course, they're going to like it. They work there. They want it to be good.
And she's their boss.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Oh, I love this. Yeah. This is really good. All these cognitive biases coming into play here. Yeah, I love that. But yeah, that idea of, at certain point, like we have to ship something. That idea of perfection over, I hate to use good enough because good enough is the wrong term there, but the best we could do given the constraints, given the time we had, but that idea, Kaizen, you could always improve it after we release, after we open the restaurant, 2 weeks from now, we could change the menu. This menu is not written in stone. So anyway, I love that idea. Tell me more about that. Any other thoughts?
Pertaining to what?
That idea of the iterative approach.
Well, you know what? I see this. It sounds like it's a tangent, but it's not. I see service design positions all the time, and I
Mm-hmm.
think I would be so good at that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get the time. Would never be able to get an interview because of just my portfolio and my resume.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about running a kitchen,
Yeah.
every single item that comes out of that kitchen is between 5 and 20 steps.
Yeah.
And each one of those steps, you're crafting the quickest, most effective line from A to B.
Mm-hmm.
5 to 10 times for every menu item, even a cup of coffee. So talk about iterative. So say I run a special for, I don't know, broiled lobster, right?
Ooh, sounds good.
And we're slammed. It's a Saturday night, and I miscalculated. I'm cutting lobsters in half to order, and that one special is putting the whole kitchen in the weeds because it needs to be iterated. The process needs to be iterated on. So on Friday or Saturday, I'm completely in the weeds. Sunday, I run it again. Sunday, I'm pre-splitting those lobsters.
Right.
So it's not just it's iterative and just not just
Yeah, that's a
in
great point.
recipe, but in
Yeah.
process.
I love that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. How we work with our software team for one sprint versus another sprint. And that's the beauty of something like Agile too, is, you're breaking these 6-month, year-long releases up into 2-week sprints or however long your team does a sprint. And you can, and that's what I love about retros too, right? Like and this is why I think it's really important for UX designers to go to retros every sprint, because you have an insight, you have input into how the team overall, not just the UX team, can improve anything. I mean, that's the beauty of that agile kind of idea, right? And Scrum. So that's a really great point. I love that you call that out, because it's not just the design. It's not just the file structure, whatever. You can improve process, meetings, how we meet, how often we meet. We didn't meet, so next sprint, let's meet and discuss this thing before we do a thing. And it's all about just process improvement, not just, design improvement or whatever it is, which again, I think goes back to the whole software team, which I love. I love that idea.
And I think it's important for newer designers to understand too that if you came up with something and it didn't work, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Yeah.
personal. Like
Yeah.
your process didn't work. It might work in another scenario and another day and another time and another place. Don't take this stuff personal.
Yeah.
I see that a lot, and it's not going to help your career. You just have to compartmentalize and realize we're talking about your process, not you, or we're talking about something you created, but not you. So
Yeah.
separate yourself out of that critiquing process.
Yeah. So you mentioned service design, and that's kind of really like my job now is really more service design, strategy, research, putting all the things together. And one of the things that I think, this is very similar to I had a conversation with Bobby Johnson, who did this, he's baked cakes and he did a cake study and he used that experience, it's not a one-to-one translation, obviously, but he was able to create a case study about that and explain like his process and all that stuff. And he's been working now as a UX designer for a year or two. And I think in your case, like that idea of creating talking about service design directly applies. I mean, it's not a one-to-one translation, obviously, but the concepts are there. It's systems thinking. It's thinking about the bigger picture. It's not being laser focused on my little plate that I'm doing right now and making sure it's the most beautiful plate that guest has ever seen. It's the bigger picture. It's the bigger picture. It's all the stuff going on around you, just like you said. So, I don't know. We could talk more about that later, but I think there's probably more there you could certainly talk to. I think one of the problems though is that service design not always tends to be people who've done the other stuff for longer, and you sort of slowly get into it. But anyway, I don't know. Maybe that's something you could take that offline, maybe. But yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover there, and that's sort of again where I mentioned I had this analogy. So this is sort of my analogy for the restaurant industry and software. When you think about like all the various teams, right? Like I've heard people talk about, design as a team sport, quote unquote. And I've heard a lot of people push back on that idea that design is a team sport. But what they're really saying, and they use the wrong words, I think, but UX design is not a team sport. Design is not the team sport. Building software is the team sport. And
Mm-hmm.
crafting a really great user experience is a team sport. I've talked about this a lot, this idea that, UX designers can't control bugs, they can't control APIs being down, internet speeds, slow page load times, like all those things. The whole team, how the software is marketed and the brand promise, that's not something the UX designers generally control. So for us as UX designers to assume that we can design the experience is frankly a load of crap. We can influence it and inform part of it, but we're certainly not designing it. So that idea, though, of restaurants, you've got, front of house, you've got back of house, you've got, the servers, you've got the hostess, you've got, the people, the maitre d', maybe you've got a sommelier if you're at a fancy restaurant, you've got line cooks, you've got sous chefs, you've got all these other things, you've got, the marketing team who's creating advertisements and stuff. And when, you walk into the restaurant, right, and you look at the menu, you expect these teams to work in tandem to get you that meal relatively quickly, right? And you expect it to be what you ordered. You expect it to be on time and not cold. And, there's certain things. And when you think about software, I work in a giant team, and we've got multiple orgs, right? And this is maybe more true for a really big team. Multiple orgs, different priorities, different budgets. They often don't talk together. And I was having a conversation with one of our program managers the other day, and we're talking about how all these teams are building really cool stuff. They're all building really high-tech solutions for things, and it's amazing technology, but they don't talk. And then we go and sell stuff to customers, and the customers get this like disjointed, nothing connects, nothing talks. It's just a really weird experience. And I'm like, imagine you're in a restaurant and you've got a bunch of line cooks that are creating the most beautiful dishes in the world. One's creating this fancy Thai dish. One's got a fancy French dish. One's got, the best hot dog you've ever had. And there's no menu though, and they walk in and they're just like, nobody comes and talks to them. Nobody seats them. And so, one of the things that my program is like, do you think we have too many cooks in the kitchen? And I was like, no, we don't have an executive chef. We don't have someone crafting a menu. We don't have somebody planning this out. What is the experience and what do we want customers to be able to order? And how do we want to interact with them? Do we want table service? Do we want counter service? Do we want take ahead, take away? Do we want call? Like, are we going to be DoorDash? It's like none of these things are planned. And so the similarities though is like the customer has an experience, whether we plan it or not. And so in the example, like you're with the law firm, like imagine those guys, you mentioned they hired well, but imagine, they were trying to do it on their own, and they all had different ideas, and a customer walks in, they're like, there's no sign, they don't know where to order, they don't know if they're supposed to order, table service or not. And imagine that experience, right? There's an experience. I'm having probably a bad experience, maybe, but that experience exists, and our teams can either plan it and do what they can to meet that outcome that we expect, or they could not, and so you have all these teams that are working together or not. And at the end of the day, the customer has an experience, whether we plan it or not, and I feel like that to me is like a really great analogy, comparing and contrasting like all the different players on the software team, sales team, marketing team, product support. That's another one that can have a huge impact on the experience. Like, when it breaks and no one can help me, that's not something the UX team can handle. But, that's something that directly influences the experience, So anyway, that's my analogy, but I just I love thinking about it in terms of something simple like that, especially when talking to product teams who don't really often, or business people who really don't know how to build software. That's not their job, so. Anyway,
so they need an expediter. So you're saying like UX teams, they needed. Remember when Richie had his moment?
We need an expo, yeah.
Yeah, we need an expo. I actually had an interview this morning, and we were talking about that, about like ambassadors from teams who can actually communicate with other teams, and now we can call them expos. Each team needs an expo to talk to the other teams.
Yeah, it's funny. It's kind of interesting if I think about like Scrum, like a Scrum master. Is almost like an expo, they're kind of like there to get things done, remove blockers maybe, but such and such, we got to get this done. What can I do to help you get this done? Very similar, like expo. Oh, that table's waiting for a thing. I need this now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
I love that.
I don't know, kind of a brand. I just thought of that, but anyway. All right. What's the next one? What you got?
The next one is workflow efficiency.
Okay. Talk about that one.
I think this one weighs a little heavier on the restaurant side in my world.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I decide as the executive chef, we're going to change this today, it can be changed today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where when you're on a big team, it's like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah. And this one might be true for startups though. Like they're definitely more nimble, you know, fewer people, fewer decisions,
yeah,
or
which is
fewer
probably why I
blockers to
love
decision.
the startup
Yeah.
craziness.
Yeah, that's
It just
funny.
makes sense for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I imagine working in a giant corporation is more similar to working at like a place like Chili's, you know, like that kitchen team can't say, I've got a better way to do this because there is, you know, you can't
No,
change the recipe, you know, maybe
right.
you
The
could
chili's
influence
coming in a
yeah.
bag from
Yeah.
corporate.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's no way for you to, you know, change that recipe. Maybe there's a chain of command, you could submit something
There's a
to say, "Hey, yeah,
process.
right,
It'll take
a
a year.
workflow." There's a workflow, which is I
Right.
think very similar to like a large corporate software
Yes.
team where, you
Yep.
know, but that's actually I hadn't thought about that one, but that's actually kind of fascinating to think about. We're definitely more like a giant franchise chain type of thing where we don't really control everything
Right.
as much as we
I
want to.
think this episode will definitely really vibe with people who've worked in the food industry and in corporate like corporate tech, because
Yeah.
it's just so relatable.
It is. I know. That's man. I've been wanting to do this episode for so long. So that one. So what else? Any other thoughts about the process?
Nope. Then I go to prototyping, which,
Okay.
it's pretty obvious what the crossovers there are, right?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on there?
Well, chefs create prototypes in the form of recipes
Uh huh.
and test them and refine them before, finally saying, okay, this is dining room worthy.
Yeah.
UX designers do it, in wireframes and prototypes, and they test and refine and test and refine.
Yeah.
So it's almost, that's one of the more almost exact crossovers, I
Yeah.
feel like.
And we talked a little bit about like in the example of the bear. Keep coming back to that one because that was sort of the idea that sparked this whole episode.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, Carmi and Sydney, they're crafting their menu. They're trying different things. They're prototyping. Yeah, and so I mean that's all. You know, I can't imagine there's ever a scenario where a chef creates a recipe without trying it first. You know,
No.
it's never gonna happen. I mean, even in like, when I'm making a recipe, can you imagine somebody like serving it without tasting it first to make sure it didn't need more salt or something? You know. So anyway, yeah, that one's actually a really great example, and I think if you haven't worked in a restaurant and you have seen the bear, that's a really great example. I think, and you're an executive chef, so you would know better than me, but that seems like a really great example of how a restaurant may go about crafting a menu and
Sure.
putting
And
all
then
the stuff together.
but then you serve it and people complain about it, and
Mm-hmm.
something you thought was perfect turns out not to be so.
Right. Yeah. So
So,
it's kind of interesting. For me coming from New Orleans, we moved up to the Midwest 3 years ago, and we moved to Cincinnati. And you know, New Orleans, everybody knows New Orleans for their food, obviously. So I'm thinking like, you know, oh man, we moved to the Midwest. We're gonna have like awful, awful food experience. And the first night we moved here, you know, everything is in boxes. We like literally pulled up to the place like, you know, a few hours before. So we go get some food. Highly, highly recommended restaurant. I'm not gonna call them out on the show here, but highly recommended restaurant. So we get there, order the food, take it home. My 5-year-old at the time starts eating. He goes, "Dad, why doesn't this food taste like anything?" And I was like, "Oh man, we're not in New Orleans anymore, dude." But you know, it's the idea though. The palate of the people around here, everybody loved that restaurant,
yep.
and they weren't used to that salt, you know, the salt and everything
Right.
else that we put in our food down in New Orleans. Everything's very, very heavy when it comes to, you know, intensity of flavors. But in the Midwest, that's probably a turnoff, you know, people probably wouldn't want that, you know, or if they
You
did,
get
they wouldn't be
used
able
to
to eat it
things,
every day.
right? Like I
Right.
came up, like I learned Slack first.
Uh-huh.
And then when I went on Discord, I was like,
Oh
oh,
God, I hate Discord
I
so
hate
much.
this. But now, now I've eaten enough Discord where I'm like, all
Yeah.
right, I like this too.
It's growing on you.
Yeah, it's
It's an
growing on
acquired
me
taste.
too.
Yeah, I love it.
But, and it's also like, people who leave New York, they're like, I can't eat a pizza or a bagel in California,
That's so
like,
funny.
or
Yeah.
wherever so yeah, palates definitely are different everywhere. And I think that's the same. It's the same with user experience. You get used to, like, I came up on CorelDRAW. I used CorelDRAW before Photoshop.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's a long
Back in the
time
day.
ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then when I had to move over to Photoshop, it was a difficult transition because I had cut my teeth on CorelDRAW.
Oh, I know. And that's,
So it's the same thing.
yeah, and that's interesting because that's something to think about too. In this idea of going back to, again, software, maybe even just humans in general, cognitive sort of biases. Bias is the wrong word, but positive learning transfer. You know, when I live in an area and I am used to that food, if I open a restaurant, I have to have something that meets that palate to things that other people are comfortable with, they're used to. You know, that could be your gimmick. You know, you're different, you're totally different, totally opposite of everybody else, but you probably won't, you know, appeal to a mass audience in that sense. And if that's not what you want, that's totally fine. But, you know, if your goal is to appeal to a mass audience, you have to understand what people are doing everywhere else, you know, or what people want, what people expect, what they're used to. And so very similar to UX design in, you know, you can't reinvent the wheel just because you don't like buttons looking blue and underlined. Well, I get it, but that's what people recognize as a hyperlink, you know, so you could play around with it. But if you, you know, remove the underline and you just change the color and you make it bold, is that a link? I have no idea, you know, especially if there's no hover thing over it, right? So it's this idea of like positive learning transfer, I think, again, sort of directly applies in very similar kind of thing.
And there are points in time where certain pieces reach a pinnacle and they're perfect. Like Thomas Keller has a menu item called oysters and pearls. And it's been on his menu forever because it's like the perfect recipe. And there are instances in tech like Candy Crush. Candy Crush is done. It doesn't need to be anything more than it is. It's pinnacle. It's reached its peak. But I think that's what a lot of the work we do, we're kind of striving for that pinnacle, but the challenges along the way and the blockers along the way kind of really slow the process in tech more so than in the food business. But there is a pinnacle.
Yeah.
There is perfection to some level.
Yeah, that's a really great point. All right. What else? What's your next one on the list?
Let's see. The next one, I believe, is collaboration.
Ooh, this one is critical. Tell me about that one.
Well, I think we've mentioned a lot of the different positions in a restaurant. From the foundation and the backbone of every restaurant, all the prep guys and the dishwashers. So let's give them a shout out. The lowest paid people there, the guys who mop the floors and plunge the toilets when they're stopped up. Without them, we have nothing.
Yeah. Who's going to go to a fancy restaurant if the toilet's stopped up? Like you expect, right? I mean, you expect a certain
any
level,
restaurant,
but yeah, I mean, especially, I mean, there might be some where you put up with it, right? But you know, like for the most part, though, like you know, these people don't get a lot of respect. But I mean, you think about like, you know, who doesn't get a lot of respect in software teams? Probably like QA engineers, support technicians, you know, customer support
graphic
people,
designers. I feel like don't get enough love.
Yeah, for sure. You know, so those kind of people, I feel like I hate to compare them to like people cleaning toilets, but you know,
there's honor in cleaning toilets, especially if you just got to this country and are doing the best you can.
Absolutely, for sure. And so, yeah, I think that's really important, is to recognize that, you know, as a UX designer, are not the most important part of the machine, you know, or the cog in the machine. And, you know, this is something I see quite a bit, is UX designers get this sort of grandiose idea that they are the most important, you know, role in the entire software team. And if it's not for them, everything would go to shit. And I think that, like, it's an important role. Obviously, I'm a UX designer, but everybody has a part. And if anybody screws up or doesn't fulfill their end of the bargain, or doesn't pull their weight, the whole thing comes crashing down, you know. And it's very similar to your example of the janitors, toilet cleaners and things like that.
I think that would be great. One of those like, you know, corporate retreats where they take the team and put them in a restaurant kitchen and tell them.
Oh, you know what?
Go.
So I've done that.
Do it.
I've actually done that. So GE has this up in New York, Crotonville. It's up past Albany a little bit, and they have a big training facility there for like corporate leadership training and stuff. And the last time I went, we did a thing where we cooked a meal, like the big group of like 15 people. We all were in the kitchen. Some of us were peeling potatoes. Some of us were like separating egg yolks and stuff for making the dessert. We made like some kind of pie or some kind of cake or something. Anyway, but we did that. It was really cool. And some people were like the servers. And so we had, it's kind of cool.
And then you go back to work on Monday and you're like, I love
Yeah, I
my
know.
job.
Yeah, exactly. I miss that. Actually, it sucks. We're selling that facility, GE, which I'm really bummed about. But anyway.
They should turn it into a corporate retreat and
That's what I
charge other
said.
companies to.
That is exactly what I said, and nobody asked me. So,
and you know what? And like, turn up the pressure. Have 100 people coming. They have to feed 100 people, not each other.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Like your CEO is coming. You got to serve him. Yeah.
Put the CEO on the line.
Mm-hmm. This is another. That's actually, yeah. Put the CEO in line. That's actually a really good point. One of the other things that I have kind of said too is, I feel like working in a restaurant is something every single person should have to do, to like keep their American citizenship, is to work in a restaurant for 3 years. And I feel like this country would be so much better off
100%.
if everybody worked in the service industry for 3 years and experienced what it's like to just get shit on and treated like crap.
Yeah.
And I feel like we would just be so much nicer to everybody across the board. And I feel the same for startups. Like if you're in UX design, if you can get a job at a startup and experience that for a short amount of time, just to know what it's like, and to experience that pressure and doing all the things and being asked to juggle a bunch of stuff and wear different hats. And if you're going to get a cushy corporate job somewhere, you just appreciate that so much more. And so I don't know, I feel like it's sort of the same thing. If you want to be a UX designer, try to get a job at a startup if you can, because it's that same kind of thing. You'll kind of get that experience of being meat, essentially.
I think everybody needs to stop saying flipping burgers as a derogatory.
Yeah.
Like that. I got into it with somebody on LinkedIn about this. Most people would, after an hour, would run screaming from a McDonald's kitchen or a diner kitchen or a place where people actually flip burgers.
Yeah.
I feel really strongly about that. That is not a quote that people should be using.
I totally agree. I absolutely agree. I actually read an interesting thing the other day, and this was a McDonald's ad, so I don't know how true it is, but they said 1 in 8 people have worked at McDonald's, which seems high, but there's so many McDonald's. I guess it's not that. I guess it depends on your social strata, how many people worked at McDonald's, but that they didn't account for that. I mean, they're obviously.
We need to talk to the mathematicians who came up with that.
Yeah. Anyway, but that's kind of interesting. But I feel like it's one of those things too, like especially like a low, what's the right word? A restaurant that has low perception of value, maybe is the right word. Working in a fine dining restaurant, you get a little snooty. But working at like the fast food restaurant down the street, you don't have that air of arrogance, I guess.
You're still building skills though. You're still learning,
for sure.
Timing, and you're learning, how to collaborate, coordinate. It's still, a valuable set of skills to learn.
I agree 100%. All right. What you got? What's the next one on your list?
The next one was empathy.
This one's important.
Well, this one gets thrown around in UX a lot, not in the restaurant world so much. But what's happened the last few years is everybody and their mother is getting diagnosed with some kind of food allergy and intolerance. And you have to worry about that when you own a restaurant now. Well,
this is something I just can't stress this enough. Actually, last week I talked to Tom Griever and we talked a lot about this idea, but empathy for your team. Empathy for the people that you work with. I think this is something that restaurants probably don't do enough of, but you mentioned they're a rowdy bunch, like I look back at, again, The Bear, and they're fist fighting. One of them, his cousin got stabbed at one point,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no empathy for the people that they work with, and I think this is something that, and this is a similarity. We're missing this, I think, often, you often hear, product managers versus UX, and product versus engineering, and engineering versus UX, and stakeholders versus everybody else. So there's this lack of, this is the similarity. There's a lack of empathy for the people that we work with across the board. I feel like, you have to understand where people are coming from. And I think one of the, you could kind of see over time the progression of Cousin in The Bear, where he was very selfish, and over time he built up this empathy, and towards the end he's picking up for, at the expo station, for helping out because somebody else couldn't do it. I can't remember, Sydney had to go cook because Carmi got locked in the fridge or whatever. But so that idea of empathy, and you kind of see that in The Bear, where you take over. Let me help you out. I'm gonna help you out real quick. I know you got stuff going on. You take care of this stuff. We got to get this job done. I feel like that's something we don't see enough.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think Richie's undiagnosed ADHD, and that's a subject near and dear to my heart.
Interesting, yeah.
And when he found his niche, expediting, he was able to use his power finally. And I as somebody that is deeply in that world, I found that to be like a particularly hopeful moment. He was getting in everybody's way in the beginning and fighting with everybody and couldn't get out of his own way, and all of a sudden the world around him clicked into place as soon as he took that expediter role, and I just found that beautiful. That was one of my favorite moments.
I love it. Yeah, that was a really good too. I was like really root. At first, I hated him. I was like, this guy is such an asshole. But you kind of root for him over a while, and you could see like his progression, building that empathy up. I think in Forks, in that episode where they sent him over to go work at this fancy restaurant to kind of get that experience, and he's very bitter about it, and then he realized like Carmi was doing it for him, and he that's when I feel like it clicked, and he wanted to help his team, and he realized that team, they worked together. They collaborated well.
You have to see greatness.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. Yeah, he had to see it firsthand.
Yeah. Yep.
I love that idea. All right, empathy for your team. I
think we need to put a disclaimer on this episode. You must go watch The Bear before you listen.
I'm going to put it in the show notes. If you don't have Hulu, I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. Go get a job in a restaurant, then come back in a year, and then listen to the episode.
Or just get your friend's password.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to. I'm getting in trouble.
Yep.
All right. What else? What's the next one? What you
got? The next one is adaptability.
Adaptability. I love this. Okay, talk about.
I love this one too. So your produce order comes. You have guacamole on the menu, and all the avocados are unusable.
Okay.
What do you do?
What do you do? What would you do in that situation? I'm curious.
I'd run over to a farm stand and buy another case, and then, or I'd get on the phone. And this is where you have to be a little bit vicious, is dealing with your purveyors. And either first I would try to make them bring me a fresh case and give it to me for free because of the heartache they put me through. And if that didn't work, I would send somebody to a farm stand. And if that didn't work, I would send somebody to the grocery store. But at that point, I'm losing money because I'm paying retail.
Yeah.
So I would have to formulate my revenge on the purveyor.
Get some free crap next time.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So talk about adaptability in UX. What does that mean to you?
It's a lot more. I mean, you think you have this brilliant idea and somebody craps on it, and you know it's great, but you're not the boss and you have to adapt.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and so last week, it's funny you mentioned this one, because last week I talked with Tom about this idea of adaptability versus rigidity in UX design, and we get these people that are just so, they have this sort of principled concepts of what is and is not the right way to do things, and if you can't do it my way, we're not doing it at all. And one of the things Tom brought up in that interview was this idea that like those are the people that other people hate working with. It's not to say give up and roll over every time. That's not the point. But there's a certain time and place for, that rigidity. And there's a time and place for that adaptability and going with the flow and being pragmatic and realizing like, I want to do this, but I can't. What's the best that we can do right now? Working with those constraints. I think that's something you don't really, I think, at least people I've talked to, never seem to learn in school. What it's actually like, the constraints, working with that stuff. It's this process, this theory that in reality often is very different. and you can't have that rigidity, you know?
I hear
love
that a lot in Tech Fleet. I don't know if you know about Tech Fleet,
Yeah.
what we do. Okay.
We can go give it a plug. I know you work with Tech Fleet. You could talk about it.
Well, it's just that we get a lot of people straight out of boot camps, and then they'll get a position with us and do an 8-week sprint and be like, I learned more in that real world setting than I did in my entire boot camp or college, or there's a big difference between learning and doing.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
yes, go Tech Fleet. What we do is awesome. We're changing the lives of those boot camps graduates and getting them real world experience and helping them get jobs.
I love it. Yeah. Adaptability, flexibility. I think that's such an important thing. And to your point, it's not just about, design and stuff as well. I mean, it's about like the whole thing. At the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, what's the outcome? And how can we get that outcome given the constraints? And will we get it if I do not flex right now? If I don't give in right now, will we meet that outcome? And if the answer is no, maybe it's time to check yourself.
Yeah. One thing I kind of feel very differentiates me from a lot of the people in the restaurant business that I've worked with is I operate from zero ego, and that served me well across the board. I have a saying that I use in every situation is, I'm not on your side. I'm not on my side. I'm on the side of the business.
Yeah. I think a lot more people in software would do well to remember that, for sure.
I think we'd have much better products out there.
We absolutely would. Yeah. And going back to my example with the big, orgs and the siloed orgs, these teams function as if their little silo is the most important thing. And what they fail to realize is, like, if I don't collaborate with these other teams, I don't have to. No one told me to. It's not my job to do it, but it's for the good of the business and the customer. Ultimately, what's good for the customer in theory should be good for the business. So, being so, like, I don't know, just like laser focus on your own little thing.
Yeah. Zoom out.
Yeah. Zoom out. Think about the bigger picture. I love that. All right. What you got? What's the next one?
All right. Last one. And this is my favorite, because this is where restaurant and tech cross paths. Like in the real world.
In the real world.
Feedback integration.
Yeah. Because you might give feedback through
the
software.
game.
Yeah. Tell me about this one.
Well, I mean, in the old days, your feedback would come from the humans in your dining room. We had 3 steaks come back tonight, overcooked. The shrimp taste funny. But Yelp changed everything, because now people can leave a very specific dissertation about their deep hate or love for you.
Yeah, right.
And the problem there is most people on those platforms are there to hate. I try to go out of my way. If I have to leave something bad, I go out of my way to find another one and leave something good.
Yeah.
Because you have to be balanced. Like, if we want those platforms to really be true and work, you have to be balanced in how you give your feedback.
Yep. I love that. And so it's interesting, because in this case, you're talking about a couple of things. You're talking about feedback from users, but also feedback to your team, and not just a critique. I'm not talking design critique. I'm talking about, but that too, but also, like, hey, product manager, we did this thing last sprint. I don't think it went very well. Here's how I think we could improve on it, or I have an idea to improve it, or, it would be great if you didn't talk to the team that way, or whatever it is that your feedback is. How do you give that feedback in a meaningful way that actually improves the relationship? Because that's really the ultimate goal here, is relationships. But also on the other side, customer side, how do you get feedback? How do you take reviews? Because if you're a commercial app, you might be on an app store, you got a bunch of reviews. How do you handle 1-star reviews? That's actually another interesting thing too. Maybe there's a parallel. I can't like, I see restaurants sometimes will reply back to a 1-star review on Yelp, and I'm like, your response makes me never want to go to your restaurant.
Yes.
Like, the way that you handled that is so inappropriate. You could have just not said anything. And I probably would have never thought twice about going to your restaurant, because 1-star reviews are just like a dime a dozen on Yelp. Yeah. But the way that you handle it makes me not want to go back. And the same, 100%. I see the same on App Store all the time. The developer will reply with a 1-star review, and I'm like, you're a goddamn asshole. Like this
Think it,
guy
don't
was an
say it.
idiot.
That's what
This
my mom
guy,
used to say.
yeah, like this guy was an idiot, but you're an asshole, And so that's the kind of stuff, like, I think there's an important lesson there for how you graciously accept feedback is maybe another parallel as well.
And,
And
I mean, you have to do it with humility, but
yeah,
also you if you look at a restaurant has 500 5-star reviews and 1 or 2 1-star reviews, people are
yeah,
smart enough to
right,
know
right.
those 1 or 2, you're never going to satisfy them.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny. I used to work wait tables, and we had this this dish on the menu. It was a grilled quail dish or something like that, and we had a lot of Spanish guys in the kitchen, and I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but they would overcook everything. Like if you tried to order a medium rare steak, it would come out well done, like without fail, all the time. They would just cook it until it was like rubber. And this couple would come in every single month, at least once a month, and they would order the same thing every single time. And every goddamn time, the quail would be too dry for them,
Mm-hmm.
and they would send it back, and they would order it again. And I'm like, what? But like the way that like our we just knew at that point, you know what? You could cause a scene. You could
But
be an
they're
asshole.
retraining. It's like
Yeah,
training AI. They're
yeah.
retraining your kitchen.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, constantly getting this stuff back, and over time, they did improve. I think it was like some new guys that were doing that. But anyway, but yeah, that's a good point, right? I don't know, but they would come back, and it's like how you handle that with grace. You could cause a stink, and then they yell in the restaurant, and make a scene, and then everyone's looking, and then then you look like a jerk because you didn't. So what's this? Whatever $15 meal, whatever it cost them. They would just comp it,
And they're still coming back.
and they would still come back, and they're probably telling their friends about how great the service is and all that stuff. So there's like a balance there. It's like give and take a little bit. We could be jerks and tell these people never to come back, but then they'll tell their friends, and then that's a snowball effect, and blah blah blah. Then we become known as this restaurant that gives really crappy service. So anyway, I always thought that was like an interesting experience. It's like for me, a takeaway from software was you're gonna have people complain, and you gotta just look at the bigger picture, to your point, and not take that one bit of feedback. And there's some weight to the feedback as well. There's
Especially
weight to
if they're
that feedback.
complaining about fundamentals. Like, get your fundamentals straight, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
It shouldn't crash every time I open it.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, what else? Any other thoughts about that one?
Feedback is it always brings, I guess because of Tech Fleet, I'm around so many fresh young designers. Feedback is part of design, period. So if something you design doesn't go over well with the team or with users, it is not personal.
Right. Yeah. And that's directly corresponds. I mean, culinary arts, it's an art. You put your soul into this thing, right? And you craft this thing, and you feel like it's the best goddamn menu item ever. And then somebody comes in, it's like, it's too salty. There's not enough salt. It's too spicy, or it doesn't sell. That's a good one. Yeah. You're like, why did I, it took all this time and no one wanted it.
And then staff is eating it for family meal the next.
That's so funny. Yeah. At least it didn't go to waste, but hopefully they liked it. But yeah, that's a really great point as well, right? Like, not if people don't use the feature, what are you going to do? But then again, going back to like some other like methods, like how do you get feedback? One thing that is kind of interesting, I think is very similar to something like software is, using your salespeople, maybe if you've got salespeople, as a way to gauge feedback. Like, they didn't want to buy this thing. Why? What happened?
Right.
It's
your
very similar to
is your sales staff.
Exactly. Very similar to wait staff. Like, what did people say about this? You were listening to them. What did they say? And I think that's the kind of thing that I think very similar. Not every app has sales teams, obviously, but yeah, there's certainly a lot of overlap there. I love that.
What's really interesting? Back to the night of the broiled lobster. On Friday night, I did that broiled lobster, and we sold like 60 of them. The very next day, we sold 8.
Wow. What happened,
What happened? Like, is it the same people that were here from Friday night and they just didn't want it a second?
Yeah.
Can you do user research in the dining room? Not really. Like
Yeah.
to some degree you can, but
Yeah, it's
I'm
hard.
gonna put microphones and record the conversations at each table.
You're being recorded. Yeah, watch out.
It's research.
That was actually something interesting from the bear. I don't know if this is normal, because I've never worked in a restaurant like this. But in the bear, in the Forks episode, where Richie Cousin is working, he's listening. The waiters are listening. They're taking that information back to the kitchen and crafting an experience for individual, customized experience for each individual table. Is that realistic? Does that actually happen in some of these fine
I've
dining
never seen
restaurants?
that happen. And my most fine dining moment in my life, yes, I worked with Wolfgang Puck, and that was pretty high level, but nothing compared to I ate at Stone Barns at Blue Hill. Stone Barns at Blue Hill.
I'm not familiar, but that
Okay.
doesn't mean anything. I'm
It
not very
was it
cultured.
was 20 courses, I want to
Oh,
say.
good
It
Lord.
was
Wow.
like
I'll be there
the
all day.
most insane experience. My cousin, it was just my cousin and I. She and I went. Um, it was a bucket list item. We did it, I think, for my birthday. Um, and it was unbelievably insane. But I really connected to the waiter, and we got some extras. He brought me to the kitchen. I got to meet Dan Barber, which was
Wow.
kind of like, a big deal for me, like fangirl. And we got to eat one course in the microgreens room where they grew the microgreens. So Blue Hill Stone Barns, everything
That's awesome.
there is grown in their agricultural center.
Oh, wow. Is that in New York? Where is that?
It's Tarrytown, upstate New York.
Okay.
So it's a whole experience. And like I said, every time we see each other, we talk about it. I always joke it's like we had a threesome with Chris Hemsworth. Like we sit in the corner and we talk about it. Like, do you remember the course with
yeah.
the chocolate bread with the cherries in it? Oh my
Oh my
God, this is
God.
years ago. And we
Yeah.
still talk about it. And we still look at each other across the room like we had the secret experience that nobody else had with us and
Yeah.
nobody else could ever relate to.
This is like maybe another example of like a parallel, or maybe something to avoid in UX design or software, at least, is like understand, and this goes back, I think, to understanding your audience and your users, is crafting that experience. Some things are just completely unnecessary and a total waste of your time. And if you are a certain type of restaurant, having those microgreens and all this stuff, like having a table somewhere, it's like, that is not what people are here for.
No.
And I think the same can be said for software. It's like, we could do this stuff, whether it's, extra research maybe, or I don't know, extra features, or, you name it. But there's a certain point where you say, is this why people are here? Why are we building this? Is this necessary? Does this get the outcome that we want? And in that case, that is the outcome. The outcome there, I'm sure that experience has been crafted so that people remember that for years and they talk about it for years, right? Like that's the experience that you're going there for. And the cost, I'm sure, reflects that. But you've got like a mom and pop Italian shop down the street. Like, that is not what you're going there. You're going for like a quick thing of meatballs and some pizza or something on a Friday night with the kids. Give me my Miller Lite, the coldest Miller Lite you got, some meatballs, and maybe like, some really great garlic bread. I'm done. I'm out. I'm going to go watch a movie with the kids. So like, it's like, you got to understand what it is. It's like, I think it goes back to UX design. Like, a lot of people will try to apply this theory to the things that they're doing and assume that they need to do these every single time, or we're not going to, have the best experiences. The users are going to suffer, blah, blah, blah. There's a time and a place for all these various activities that we have to do. And you've got to understand why you're there and what you're trying to achieve, and whether or not that step, that thing, whatever that thing is, that map, that process, blah, 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 whatever it is it necessary? Is it going to help us achieve that outcome at the end of the day?
Right.
And I think that's like a huge takeaway, I think, for me. But
like, you push an update and now I hate your product.
Yeah, you broke it. It was fine before.
It was like it was part of my life, and you ruined it.
You ruined it. Like, there's so many like reviews on the App Store. It's like, this last update made it blah blah blah, and so it's like people hate that stuff. But that's actually a really another thing. Like, I don't know if there's a I don't know if there is a possibility to do this in restaurant, but like A/B testing. where you may give different tables different menus and see how different plates perform that night. I don't know if that's something people do. Might be
You can do it
way
by
more
the
effort.
night. I don't think you could do it in the same night.
Yeah, you're probably right. The same night. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or maybe
that's a
every
little
week
rough.
you try a different thing. You know what I mean? But that's
Yeah.
like maybe an interesting kind of thing. I don't know if restaurants do that, but anyway, that could be like an interesting thing. Or maybe you change the names, you change the descriptions a little bit
Oh,
to
that's
see.
real. That
Yeah.
is for real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And see which ones sell. I don't know. Like that could be something you do each night. You give different tables different menus and see how the dishes perform based on the description. I don't know. Anyway, that's just like a thought. Anybody out there listening, try that. Let me know.
Yeah, let us know, because I don't ever want to do it again.
Anne's not trying it, and I'm certainly not doing it again.
Anne looks forward to Mondays. She got back into tech. I can't wait to get to work.
I had some friends back in New Orleans, husband and wife. They both worked in restaurants, and one of them was a pastry chef at Haydell's Bakery, which is like one of the big bakeries down in New Orleans, and they do like king cakes. It's like for the 2 months before Mardi Gras, that's like all they do is just work like 80 hours making king cakes and stuff. And my other buddy, he worked at oh man, what's the name of that chef? He owned like a bunch of fancy restaurants. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he was a sous chef for him, and they both worked in restaurants. They had 2 kids, and like they were never together. Like one of them was working, watching the kids, and then they finally both quit and got day jobs. Like doing other stuff in the restaurant industry, but just 9 to 5. And they were like, "What do we do with Saturday? It's Saturday. What do we do?" They're like, anything we want.
Yes, it's an adjustment for sure.
It was it was funny because they were like, it was like off-putting for them. Like, oh my god,
it's a very mild type. It's not PTSD. I don't want to take anything away from anybody who has real PTSD, but it's a form of like mild PTSD.
Yeah,
like schedule based trauma change, like when your kids stop wearing diapers.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've been through this, but
yes, twice.
All of a sudden you're like,
what happened? Yeah, what do we do now?
I don't have to change diapers anymore. Like my life has changed. So it's
so funny.
It's similar. Like it takes a little while to get used to.
You go to the store and you're like,
body through the abuse.
Yeah, you go to the store and you're like, oh, we need to buy wait, no, we don't.
No, we don't.
I'm done.
No, we don't. Now we have to pay for daycare.
I got to pay for everything else.
Yeah, I got to pay for preschool now. It usually goes from diapers to preschool.
Yeah, and it's not cheaper. It's not any cheaper.
No.
All right. Cool. Well, this has been fantastic. Well, actually, before we do that, I'll cut that out. Do you have anything else? Is there anything else you want to add?
Do you want to ask me those questions?
Oh yeah, I was going to segue into that. Okay. We have a hard stop, but we're over time. But do you have a hard stop?
No.
I got a hard stop at 1:30, but
okay.
Anyway, this is really good. It's been long, but I think it's a good one. I'll edit some stuff just to try to keep the time. But
I'm easy.
Word. All right, Anne, anything else before we got some questions I'm going to ask you, let our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. Before we do that, anything else that we didn't touch on that you think is important enough to share with everybody out there?
Don't let your kids go to culinary school.
Don't let them do it.
Watch The Bear.
Yeah, watch The Bear. That is I tell you what, my wife never worked in restaurants. She worked in like catering and stuff. She never worked in like restaurant kitchens and all that. And I don't think she appreciated it as much as I did. I'm watching this and it's funny because I was the couple of friends I was talking about that both work in restaurants. I asked them if they watched The Bear and they're like, no, I'm not doing it. They're like, I don't, it's just too real.
It's a stress response.
Yeah, it was for sure. And I've been out of it long enough where I was like, it got me a little, nostalgic for those days. But you helped me kind of whip me back, pull me back from the edge a little bit. If I won
was grateful that finally the world could get a taste of the real, why it's rough, why they should make more money, why they need more benefits, why, we just go out to eat and don't really think about, the problems of the people who work there. And the people in the back have it hard.
They do. And they don't make a lot of money and they work a lot of hours and they often don't have benefits and everything else. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. Servers, make a decent amount of money with tips and stuff, but nobody's getting tipped out in the back.
No.
Busboys get tipped out. Nobody else gets tipped out, and they're probably making barely minimum wage. Hopefully, depends on where they are. Hopefully, they make more than that. But and I go get a job. Goddamn right. Convince your kids to get a job in the restaurant industry, waiting tables, bussing tables in high school, so they appreciate that, and they will be a better person for it. I guarantee you.
It's good parenting.
Yeah, unless they end up with like a coke habit, then
which can happen because. It's
well, hopefully you don't let them go in college. Hopefully nobody's giving any of that crap to the high school kids. Probably kids in college. So don't, maybe college. It depends. But if you're going to college, wait tables because you'll make a lot more money. I promise. Don't work in the kitchen. You know, it's funny. You mentioned you didn't have to go to like 1 a.m. or sorry, 1 p.m. When I was working in the restaurant, I had to be there at 6 in the morning to start prepping for the day. And we opened at 11 and I had to be there at 6. And that would be like after going out all night drinking, getting home at like 2:30, 3 in the morning.
Yeah, no.
That's what people end up with cook habits. All right.
Yes, that is part of it.
I know
it's a real thing because you just need to get through your day. In the episode of The Bear, and he's like, "We'll all be smoking cigarettes soon." And I said to my husband, I said, "You don't understand how strong of a statement that is because those cigarettes are the only joy. We don't get to eat. I don't smoke anymore, but we don't get to eat lunch. We're feeding everybody lunch. We don't get to eat dinner. We're feeding everybody dinner." Him saying we'll all be smoking cigarettes soon is the epitome of how rough that job is because that cigarette is the high point of your day.
Right.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah. And like someone like me, I never smoked. So like for me, I was just like, I have nothing.
You had nothing.
I'm looking forward to that beer after we go to the bar down the street so I can give them all the money I made that night.
A dessert.
Like, yeah, right. Just scarfing out. Yeah. Someone's going to miss that chocolate lava cake, are they? So cool. All right, Anne. Well, this has been awesome. I love this idea, and I'm glad I got to share this with someone who actually was in the trenches much more than I ever was, and getting your feedback here. It's also nice to know that like I was a little bit correct. Some of the stuff I had to say, the cursory experience I had working in the kitchens for a few years in college. Hopefully I did. I think it taught me a thing or two.
It's a transformative experience.
It really is. All right, Anne. So we got a few questions I like to ask all of my guests. Do you have a few minutes to stick around and answer these really silly questions?
Sure. Go for it.
All right. First one. What is your favorite non-design book?
This is like asking somebody to choose their favorite kid, which I don't I don't do.
All of them. I like them all.
I would say it's a little cliche, but I love Anne Rice.
Okay. Yeah, the little connection in New Orleans there.
Yeah. But when it comes to authors, I love, these are all, so the next 3 people I'm going to name are like chef gods to the chefs. And it's Rene Redzepi, he's Noma, Thomas Keller, and Eric Ripert. Those 3 are like the chefs to the chefs. Like the highest level chefs look up to those guys. So anything they write is worth a read.
Do a lot of chefs write? I mean, Anthony Bourdain obviously comes to mind, but are there a lot of chefs that write books? Or are they ghost written? Are they actually writing them?
I think, well, I guess I should. So I worked for a celebrity chef, and we did a recipe book while I worked in that restaurant. And they would leave like 1 or 2 like twist ingredients out of those recipes. It was probably things you probably couldn't get very easily anyway.
So you didn't make it exactly the same?
Yes, exactly. So
that's funny.
And one of my favorite food books is Momofuku by David Chang.
Yeah.
Because it's a recipe book and like his life story in one book, and it's just an entertaining read.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I won't pick one. That's you get. It's a whole lead answer.
That's fair. So, this is totally off topic of books, but speaking of celebrity chefs, the celebrity chef you work for, what do you have to say? What are your feelings about his infomercials?
I said, get that money, honey.
Get it. That's that money.
That's what I say.
Does he have any say in any of those products? He just licenses his name, basically. It shows up for the recording of those things.
When I worked for him, he had like 5 restaurants in the LA area at the time. And he used to spend every day going from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, talking to the chef, seeing what was up. Is that how it is now? Probably not. He's got restaurants all over this, right. As things get bigger, their ability to be hands-on diminishes.
Back in high school, he didn't live in New Orleans, but Emerald had a bunch of restaurants in New Orleans. And I had a buddy who worked at Delmonico's, one of his restaurants downtown. And he said he would be in there pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And if you crossed him though, watch out, because he was a giant. I don't want to character assassinate anybody, but apparently he was nice, but like if you did something you didn't like, watch out. So,
Well,
which is
I
like
mean,
most chefs, I guess. But.
yeah, it's a rough business. You have to, it's like, it's just the personalities of the people who want those jobs. They're a
Exactly.
hard
Right.
group to keep in
Yeah.
line. So you have
Yes.
to be a little bit of a drill sergeant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, I think that's something that the Bear did a pretty good job of showing is some of those folks, like the I don't want to say attitude, the sassiness of some of them, maybe. I don't know, attitude might be the right word.
And the guy
But
who was like smoking crack in the middle of,
yeah,
yeah, that's real. I've
we
had
had
people
a
get arrested out of the back door.
dude, we had the exact same thing happen at where I was working. The dishwasher was selling pot out the back door of the restaurant, and so like imagine that, like, like I just
No
when you're
surprise.
the owner, you're like, what are you thinking,
No
dude? Like,
surprise. I had one guy get pulled off the line in handcuffs
oh
for,
my
I
god,
want to say he didn't pay child support.
wow, oh
I
man,
forgot. It's been
I
years.
was expecting something totally different when you mentioned that, but like, man, yeah, God, that's crazy. Well, I guess that's probably like the only place I could find him was at work.
It's a hard gig, and it attracts a rough crowd. And the fact that it's a hard gig makes that rough crowd even rougher over.
Yeah. Oh, well,
So,
I'm just thinking about, like, how does a dude pay child support? You take him off.
and he's
You take him
working.
off with a shift. Where's he going to get money from? I mean, it's such a stupid way to. I don't know. It's a stupid way to penalize somebody. All right.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. What's your favorite non-design pod? Or that's what they told everybody. Good. What's your favorite non-design podcast?
You know what's funny? Outside of yours and Darren Hood's, I really don't listen to that many podcasts.
Oh, you lumped me and Darren Hood together. I'm honored. Thank you.
And those are both design. I like, and what it's the sad part is, I dabble in interior design and
Oh, wow.
other
Okay.
kind of design like that when I'm not doing, like tech based work. So like I like to watch things at like home reno and that kind of stuff. So I'll YouTube and listen
YouTube
to that stuff
counts.
on
That's
TV.
somewhat similar. I mean, it's a visual-ish podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I was raised by an engineer and an art teacher, so
Oh, wow.
I just kind of came up always having my hands in clay or
Yeah, that's awesome.
mosaic or crayons or paint or whatever. So to me, that's downtime and fun, even though it's sort of related to work.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I feel the same way. I mean, I love doing that kind of stuff. Like for me, downtime is doing this kind of crap. So
Yeah, exactly.
all right. What is your favorite meal? This is a hard one probably for you to answer as a chef, but
Nope. This is
is
an
it easy?
easy one.
All right. What is it?
I like to go to Flushing, Queens, to a dirty Vietnamese restaurant and have a big bowl of pho.
I'm with you, man. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's one thing I miss about New Orleans. We had a lot of Vietnamese restaurants. We had a huge Vietnamese. Oh my god! And it's like some of those restaurants. Yes. Oh my god. We call them po' boys out there. Vietnamese po' boys. You know what's funny? When I moved to Cincinnati, one of the guys was like, "Yeah, we're going to get some Vietnamese hoagies for lunch." I was like, "Oh!" I was like, "All right, I see. All right, we did the same thing with po' boys. I get it." But yeah,
the gift of being in the part of New York I'm in is being able to get to Flushing, Queens, and any Asian food in Flushing.
Oh
Mochi
god,
donuts.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. You guys have. I'm jealous.
Everything.
Y'all got like I mean, there's literally anything. I remember one time, my wife and I. Well, I say one time because we have kids and we can't do this anymore. But years ago, my wife and I would just go to New York for the weekend. Like we'd get $100 flight and we'd stay at these like little one like hotel that didn't even have a bathroom, like hall bathrooms, like $100 a night. We just stayed
like a hostel.
Yeah, and we would go, and the itinerary would just be restaurants. It'd just be, I want this ethnicity, that thing, this thing, that thing, and that's how we would plan our trips, And God, I remember we had like all kinds of stuff. Like for me, being from New Orleans, like New Orleans is known as like a food city, but it's New Orleans food. Like we don't really have other ethnicities other than Vietnamese. We have really good Vietnamese, but like there's Indian food is terrible down there. Like there's not a lot of niche, I guess, for lack of a better word, ethnic restaurants down there. So going to New York and it's like, I don't know, we had like Nepalese food. We had like,
Ethiopian.
some kind of like, we had Ethiopian, but there was another like African region. I can't remember the region, but it was like I've never even heard of the region before. It's just something African, but it was like Afghanistan. We have like, there's an Afghani restaurant that we went to. But yeah, stuff like that, like Iranian, there's an Iranian restaurant, Persian restaurant. Yeah. Anyway, I miss that stuff. One day when my kids are old enough to leave them home, That's I'm not gonna travel by myself.
They get old enough that you get to leave.
Oh, is that happening soon? When does that happen?
It will come. You just have to live more.
Oh my God! Yeah, that's the trick. Hopefully they don't like kill me first. All right, what is your favorite vacation spot?
I go to Vermont a lot, but I'm happy any place where I'm in the mountains, in the woods with a fire. That's it. That's all I need.
Doesn't matter where. And New York, you got a lot of stuff around you where you could do that.
But so. my number one on my bucket list is I want to sleep under the Aurora Borealis. That's number one. And then number two, I want to do like a food tour of Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Would you do like a tour? Would you just make your own tour? Just do your own tour.
I'm a Rolling Stone.
I love that. Yeah, that's my kind of, and it probably wouldn't be that expensive. It'd just be expensive getting there.
No, and I'm a researcher, so I can do my research and figure out where I want to go. I'd like to do the Anthony Bourdain food tour of the world and just go everywhere he said to go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ooh, God, that'd be good. Oh man, Anthony Bourdain, I love him. All right, what is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Paper and magic markers.
Why markers? Why markers specifically? Usually people say pen.
I like colors.
Okay.
I like the double-sided ones, like this one. It's got a fat tip and a tip. And I don't like cheap markers that stop working after 2 minutes.
Yeah. Speaking of which, this was my mistake. I did never do this again. I went and bought these cheap sticky notes. They're not even
off Post-its.
Yeah. Oh, they're
dollar store.
Awful. They do not work.
They don't stick.
Oh, they're so bad. And then I have
make
this
mini paper airplanes out of them.
Like this one. Yeah. Look at this. This is the stupidest thing. It's like nobody can see this at home. It's like an accordion.
Use it as streamers for a party.
Sounds fun, except like you're constantly having to flip it around. Your sticky notes are upside down, and then it doesn't stick. So like you write something what you think is right side up, and it's upside down, and it falls. It's such a.
You're
never buy
GE Aeronautics, right?
Aerospace.
Bring them to work and tell the guys to turn them into paper airplanes, so they're not a complete waste.
That's a really good idea. Like a bunch of these little things, that'd be fun. Anyway, so cheap stickies, cheap markers. Just go with the good stuff.
Well, you know what? Your designs, I think, the root of your designs need to happen in your mind, not in Figma.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And the easiest way to get things out of your mind and into the world is on paper.
Yeah. I was telling somebody that actually today I had a conversation this morning that they were talking about solutioning something, and I was like, just go and talk to people, do the research, ask the questions, think. Just think about it for a little while. And if you do that right, you ask the right questions of the right people in the right way, the answers just show themselves, and you don't have to spend, countless time iterating in designs because you're going to know exactly what the right approach is from the beginning.
You iterate in your mind.
Yeah, iterate in your head. And then you don't spend, 80% of your time in Figma. You spend 80% of your time thinking and 20% of your time designing. I made that up. I don't know if that's true or not, but that is my approach. I like that idea. That's very true. I like that. All right, Anne. Well, that is it for us for today. I really appreciate you coming on. This was fantastic for me. I know you don't want anybody to go work in restaurants and anything like that, but I still get this little itch. I get this itch every once in a while. I want to go bartend or something.
Kids to work in restaurants.
Not adults. Once you've done it, you can't do it again.
During high school and college.
Yeah.
But don't go to culinary school to become a chef unless you were. Maybe in Vegas, they have union and they take care of them.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Some places in New York City, but in general, it's a rough ride.
Yes, it is. So, it is a rough ride.
I don't want to. If it's your passion and you love it, that's cool. Do it as a hobby and get a job that actually pays.
I meant to tell you this before, but down in New Orleans, right in my old neighborhood, actually, there was a place called Appetite Repair Shop, and this guy Peter Vasquez, he's a former chef. He had a fancy fine dining restaurant in New Orleans for a long time. After Katrina, he's just like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. He bought a house, turned the bottom into a window, and he just makes these amazing menus. One thing, he'll have a main, a couple sides, and a dessert. And he makes some little prepackaged things you could buy if you want. But that's it. That's all he does. And when he's out, and it's just him. And that's what he does. And he bought the house. He lives there. He does that, and he only does it 3 nights a week, I think. It's called Appetite Repair Shop down in New Orleans. If anybody,
and I bet it's
still, I haven't been there in a while.
And love for him
so good. Oh my God, yeah. And he takes off whenever he wants. He actually he went and helped I think earthquake victims at one point, or flood victims, hurricane victims somewhere, and he would just go and cook for them and stuff. And he made his money. He sold his restaurant and stuff. So that's all he does. And there's no stress. He doesn't have to deal with employees, doesn't deal with dishwashers not showing up, and all that crap. He doesn't have to deal with sassy employees talking back.
Sounds like he found his way.
That's it. But it took him a while to get there. But anyway, that's not something you could just do right out of right out of the bat. But cool. All right, Anne. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been an amazing episode. A little long, but that's all right. I think this is a good one. And if you haven't seen The Bear, go check it out. At this point, it's probably too late. But if you haven't seen The Bear, go check it out. It's fantastic, fantastic show. Highly recommend it. That's it for me for today. All right, I'm done. That's it.